Ego gives a false feeling of separation from existence. Ego gives a false feeling of separation from existence. Because of this false feeling, you start fighting with existence and with everything around you. You fight in your life with your husband, wife, children, parents, everyone. And this feeling of fight creates bondage. When you fight, you are in bondage. When you fight, you are bound to be defeated, because the part cannot win against the whole. You are part and existence is whole. And because of this fight with the whole, you feel in bondage, everywhere limited. Whenever you move, an invisible wall comes around you. That wall is nowhere in existence. It moves along with your ego. It is part of a separate feeling. You struggle against the whole, and in the struggle, you are constantly defeated. This feeling of bondage creates limitations. You feel we are aliens, we are separate from one another, whereas we are neither aliens nor as strangers joined. We are bound to each other by a causeless force. By surrender means the surrender of ego. You surrender the wall that separates you from becoming one. Surrender does not mean anything else. It means you are surrendering the invisible wall that separates you from the other. So whatsoever you are surrendering is just a dream, a concept, a false notion. You are not surrendering the reality. You are just surrendering all that is false, all that is non-existence, all that you feel you are separate from the other. The moment you surrender this false attitude, you become one with existence. This is the only meaning of surrender. Then there is no conflict. There is oneness. You realize we are not separate from one another. Instead, we are one, synergistic harmony. And if there is no conflict, there is no limitations. You have no limitations. Nowhere there comes a bondage or a boundary between you and an existence. There is no boundary. The moment you realize there is no boundary, no limitation between you and me, surrender has happened. You are not separate from me. I am not separate from you. When this feeling deepens in you, you have attained freedom. You cannot be defeated then, because there is no one to be defeated. You cannot feel despair, despondency, or anything because there is oneness. The drop and the ocean has become one. As long as they remain separate, there comes a bondage. There comes a gap. You cannot die because there is no one to die. The body comes into existence and disappears. Emotions arise and dissolve like waves. Like one of the myriad waves, your body comes into existence and then dissolves one day in the vastness of the ocean. A wave of emotion arises and then giving you fulfillment, giving you a right to enjoy the moment, it disappears in an unknown oblivion. You cannot be in misery because there is no one to be in misery. The moment you surrender the ego, the separation, the invisible walls. The whole nonsense is surrendered. The misery is surrendered, the bondage is surrendered, there is pain surrendered, suffering is surrendered, hell is surrendered, everything is surrendered. You become one with existence, and this oneness is freedom. This oneness that you experience is freedom. Separation creates the bondage. Oneness is freedom. That not that you become free. Remember this. You are no more. The drop, the freedom means the drop has merged in the ocean. Drop that was always part of the ocean, but drop was considering itself to be separate from the ocean. It was turbulent. The river was turbulent and disturbed. And the moment it begins to dissolve in the ocean drop by drop, one drop merges with the ocean, next drop, and like that, all that drop merge into the ocean. There comes a fulfillment, there comes a freedom. You feel that you exist separate from the other. Can you be separate from me, or I can be separate from you? As far as certain things are concerned, you feel that I'm talking about the oneness. Oneness at emotional level, oneness at the level of intellect and everything. Yes, at certain you have your space, but deep within, when we look at it, we look at the life at the outer life alone. You are separate, I am separate. Separate existence. But there is something that connects both of us together. And that is that which connects us from one another. It is our, and immediately it creates a feeling of oneness. Separation is bondage, oneness is freedom, not that you become free. Remember this, you are no more. There is no one. The drop does not exist the moment it dissolves into the ocean. So there is no question of the drop has become free. This merger in the whole is freedom. Disappearance of you as an individual identity is freedom. So it is not that you become free, you are no more reality. Really, when you are not, freedom is the bondage is ego. The moment ego is not, you are not separate, there is no conflict. There is no conflict, there is no disturbance, there is no pain, there is no suffering. Freedom is how to express this state is a problem. When you are not, freedom is, Buddha is reported to have said, you are not going to be in bliss. When you are not, bliss is. So you are not blissful, instead bliss alone is. You are not going to be liberated, you are going to be liberated from yourself. That's why freedom is freedom from the other, freedom from the self, and just freedom. So freedom alone exists. Freedom alone exists. So freedom is not freedom of ego, that ego feels free. It is freedom from ego. And if you can understand this, that freedom is freedom from ego, you are not seeking the freedom of ego. Instead, it is freedom from that bondage. Ego is the bondage. Then surrender and freedom becomes one. There is no conflict between the two as it appears. Surrender and freedom seems to be in conflict with one another. When you understand really what is the freedom, are you seeking freedom for or freedom from? You are not seeking freedom for ego, you are seeking freedom from ego. And when you attain to freedom from ego, there comes a deep feeling of oneness. Then you realize there is no conflict between freedom and surrender. Instead, both become one. Two sides of the same coin. Then they mean one. But if you take ego as the standpoint from which you think that you want to attain freedom, then ego will say, why surrender? And this is what happens. You want to exist as ego, and then surrender becomes a conflict. When you want to attain freedom from, not for ego, you want freedom from ego, then surrender is the way, and there is no conflict between surrender and freedom. But if you take ego as a standpoint from which to think, then ego will say, why surrender? Because if you surrender, then you cannot be free. Then you become slave. When you surrender, you become a slave. Really, you are not surrendering to someone. You are not surrendering to someone. As it is understood that you come and you surrender to the master, you are not really surrendering to anyone. It is the second standpoint that you need to understand. First, surrender means you want the freedom from ego, so you surrender. And then surrender to who? Second standpoint becomes important for you to understand. You are not surrendering to someone. This is the second point to be understood. You are not surrendering to anyone. Instead, you are simply surrendering. There is no one who will take your surrender. There is no one who is taking your surrender. When you surrender, you say, metaphorically, you surrender to the Master. So, Master is what? Master is oneness. Master is existence. There is no one who will take your surrender. If there is someone and you surrender to him, then it is a kind of a slavery. This is what people do not understand. Really, there is not even a God to whom you are surrendering. And when you talk about God, that is just to find you something to help you to surrender. So, as such, if I say you surrender, immediately the question comes in, surrender to who? Surrender to you, to who? And there is no one, not even God, to whom you are surrendering. And when you talk about God, that is just to find you something to help you. This is simply to help you to complete the process of surrender. So Master is just a help for you to complete the process of surrender. And when you surrender to the Master, what you did? Did you not feel free? Did you not feel more and more free to think? Emotionally, you feel freedom. Intellectually, you feel freedom. There is no bondage of any kind that you cannot do this, you cannot do that. In Patanjali Yoga Sutra, God is talked about just to help you to surrender. There is no God. Patanjali says in the very beginning in his Yoga Sutra, there is no God. But it will be difficult for you to surrender to one. It will be difficult for you to simply surrender. If I say surrender, immediately it will come surrender to who? So the Master, the God, or you cannot surrender to something which is, you cannot conceive of surrendering, cannot imagine of surrendering to an empty space. But finally it happens that way. You feel bondage even when you are alone. When as long as ego is there, you feel bondage even when you are alone. You do not feel free. Even in your privacy, you do not feel to do things that you would have liked to do. And the moment you surrender to someone, then you attain to freedom. You are free to do things which you never conceived of doing in your privacy. To help surrender, God is talked about. So God is just a method, a way. This is rare but very scientific. God is just a method, a technique to surrender. A method to help you in the process of surrendering. There is no one who is going to take your surrender. Yes, bring you, I will take your surrender. When you surrendered to your Master, what did happen? What did you do? Did you give him anything? You attain the freedom, something that you could not imagine of doing, you did it. Did it not feel like freedom? Freedom from something that was bondage to you? Did you give anything physically, emotionally, or anything to the one who you surrendered, Master? If you have surrendered to the Master, did you give him anything? No. You attained to your freedom to do anything which you could not imagine that you can ever do. Even in your privacy, you could never imagine that you could do this. With surrender, you are now free to do anything that you would have liked to do. So there is no one who is going to take your surrender. If there is someone, then your surrender is slavery, bondage remains. This is a very subtle and deep point that you have to understand. Why surrender brings the freedom? You surrender the feeling that you are separate from the whole. Drop is part of this ocean because it is the ocean, the water from the surface of the ocean, when evaporates with the intense heat of the sun, then it forms the rain cloud, and rain cloud showers. There are drops. Drops become a stream of river, and then it continues its life of turbulence all along, and then finally when the drop merges into the ocean, drop by drop merges into the ocean, the drop that was part of the ocean dissolves back into the ocean, and it no more exists as separate. Now the moment your surrender completed, you attain to enormous freedom. This is very subtle and deep point to understand. There is no God as a person whom you are surrendering. It is just a way, Master is just a technique for your surrender to complete. The process of surrender. Surrender is a process, and Master is the technique through which the process of surrendering completes. Master is a technique, is a way, is a method to complete the process of surrendering. It's not something that you take out $100 from your pocket and give it to the Master and you say you have surrendered. Surrender is of totality. Surrender that we are one. We are not separate from one another. Patanjali relates many techniques to complete this process of surrender. One of them is the idea. Because if I say surrender, you will ask to whom? If I say simply surrender, it will be difficult for you to conceive. Try to understand the difficult. Try to understand in a different way. If I surrender, if I say, I love you, if I say to you, simply love, you will ask, love whom? If I say simply, simply love, you will ask whom? What do you mean by simply love? There is no one to be loved. How to love? If I say pray, then you will immediately ask, to whom? Worship to whom? Your mind cannot conceive non-duality. For you, love is a duality. You love your spouse. You love your parents. But now, do you love your master? Do you love your children? In a way you can say, but you are loving. You are simply love. Manifestation of love. Manifestation of that fragrance, that beauty, that luster. That is the outcome of inner blossoming. Love is the inner blossoming. It is unaddressed, not to any particular person, but to the whole. It is the blossoming of the inner flower. It is the blossoming, it is lighting the lamp within. When the lamp is lit within, there is light all around. There is luster, there is its grace, there is its beauty. And in that, everything becomes visible. When you see everything in its reality. The moment love has blossomed in its full glory in you, you see and you look at the world and surroundings in a totally different manner. Is it not this happening to you? Your love is the way to look at the world. Look at the existence around you. Hasn't your way of looking around has changed in you? When love blossomed, is this love directed to any particular person, or your love for your spouse, love for your children, love for your mother, love for your father is of a different quality? It is the same energy that flows towards the other. But you may interact with the person differently. When you interact different people, you interact according to their needs. But the light, you carry the torchlight in a corner for a different purpose. You take that light, that lamp, that candle that can be used for different purpose. Love is that candle. Love is that fragrance. Love is that beauty that illuminates every occasion, every situation, every happening around you. Enough for now.